All right, Hotel Family, peace, Brother Ron Washington with Black Media Incorporated. It is Black History Month, 2012, and this is our month, Black people. All right, and we need to celebrate what is called Black History Month. And before I do dive directly into the first lecture, I want to clear up something that's a very disgraceful matter concerning our circuit in the last 10 years or so. More blacks each year during this month begin to bicker and quarrel about, shall we even celebrate Black History Month? Because some say we shouldn't celebrate it because we live all year, and I mean, I don't know how we get to this point of confusion, but we need to squash it, we need to get rid of it, we need to grow up. And I wanted to say that first before I dive directly into the message. It was a monumental decision made by Carter G. Wilson, who took 1 week out of the year, which rolled over into a month, to set aside to bring remembrance and honor and to reward the great contributions of all African American people around the world. This was his story. This was the point and the message. He was the father of Black history, the youngest of 9 children, whose parents was born slaves. He was robbed of an early education because he had to work in the fields to take care of his family. So when he finally went to high school, he graduated within 2 years. And then he went on to Harvard University to become the second black man to receive a PhD in America. He also authored and co-authored 22 books, and he went around the country teaching blacks to uphold their achievements. And this is how the story started, but it's not how the story is going to end. So we shouldn't add or take away from it. So let's keep it real, black people. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. But the legacy of slavery and the truth about slavery. If the truth ever be told about the peculiar institution of slavery concerning the enslavement of our ancestors, it would actually make us think differently about our own story. It will make us search a little more deeply about the truth and what was told to us by our ancestors. Let me give you a case in point. Years ago, I began to prepare an Afrocentric curriculum for the month of February. I guess about 10 years ago. It was in during Black History Month, and I was doing this for the church. And I saw a live video of how blacks back in the 30s to 40s were being caricatured and even doing slavery. And a white racist said that if it wasn't for black slavery in America, blacks would be in Africa as a disease, impoverished, uncivilized people. And when I heard that, I said, white boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Because before our ancestors were taken over into slavery, they built a phenomenal civilization that went through 38 dynasties. Yes, 38 during their reign. The first dynastic period, a mighty general by the name of Namir controlled the region. The second dynasty period, the king Nanetta came into power. The third dynasty was raised up a man by the name of Josiah, who built the step pyramid for burial sites, museums, and artifacts. The fourth king was Imhotep, and the fifth king, of course, was Khufu, and I can go on and on and on. But Khufu, he built the first Great Pyramid on the Giza Plaza, and I can go on and on about the famous pharaohs and the King Tux and so on. But these are just a few black kings who ruled in the ancient land of Kemet, who had power and influence in the Kemetic land in Africa. So we didn't need Europeans and Arabs or no other race of people to come and help supervise or civilize us, because our people were already civilized and had a great civilization. Okay, there was jealous people with racist hearts who was jealous of our people's outstanding progress and success in the land. So they plotted to invade the land, and they did. 9 different countries, of course, was involved in the slave trade. So can you imagine 9 different countries coming at you at one time with their military expeditions to take you into slavery? So that's what happened, and the transatlantic slave trade began. And our mighty race of people were kidnapped and captured and placed in chains and bound, and for the what I call the death march, where they marched them all the way from the geographical area in which they lived until the slave port, which took sometimes days and weeks. The slave port, of course, was a dungeon. This was the first stage of slavery. It was genocide. The first genocide of our people was stripping them from the sacred grounds of the land of Africa. They were bound for the ships, and they tell us that there was 118 ships involved in the slave trade, and the first 78 ships were purchased, insured, and outfitted by wealthy Jews. But you won't hear about that in the history books. That's right. they played a big part in the transatlantic slave trade as well. And our people, of course, they tell us that then the 30 to 60 million of our people were sucked out of their native land. So when you hear whites talk about the land of Africa and all the suffering that you hear about it, just think about 30 to 40 million to 60 million of people, primarily of their kings, their queens, their dear warriors, their matriarchs, their patriarchs, stripped from their land, their resources stripped to build up the Americas, which made them rich. And when you hear the media, and then the media going to turn around and teach us a lie about our own history and tell us all kind of lies about how we was over there as jungle bunnies running around naked in Africa. But no, we had the greatest civilization. So this was the biggest lie that they ever told about our history. That's why we need to reteach our history, rewrite it, and tell the truth about it to our children so they can know the truth. Okay? Because in America we've been whitewashed with black history. So and then you hear stories like these founding fathers was Christian men. Yeah, right. They were Christian kidnappers. They were Christian liars. They were Christian rapists. They were Christian murderers. And and people of color, you got to understand the truth. So when you hear stories like that, yeah, I ask them what kind of Christian. So, and not only that, but how can they tell us that white man was fleeing religious persecution in Europe, got on the ship, traveled 13 weeks across the Atlantic Ocean just to find somewhere to pray, just to find somewhere to build a church? Please, man, come on. If you believe that, I got $1 million worth of life insurance I want to sell you for $1 a month. So that was the first stage of slavery. The second stage of slavery was also brutal as well, as our people began to be packed in the bottom of ships like sardines in a can. So can you imagine these ancient ships that had no lights at the bottom of the decks? They were fighting for space. They didn't have any restroom facilities down there. They were very sick, vomiting because of the movement of the ship. Many of them went mad because of the claustrophobic quarters. They suffocated. Many of them perished down there for 9 to 13 weeks crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Many of them revolted before they got on board and while they was on board. Many of them were thrown into the sea to be eaten up by sharks because they said they would rather die than to be a slave. So the third stage was the drop-off points in the Caribbean, which was called the seasoning. It was the breaking point of the slave. It was to break the spirit of the slave. The slave master would rapes. They would perform rapes, beating, brandings with hot irons, all kind of things. I read one tactic that the French was using on the Haitian people called disembowelment, when they would take the bodies of dead slaves, cut their stomachs open, pack food in them, and train the dogs to go eat out of the stomachs of dead slaves. So when a slave was caught fleeing, they would sick the dogs on them, and they would go directly straight for their stomachs, rip out their intestines and everything that's inside your abdominal area. This was very brutal and wicked. So this was just a few acts of brutality in their captivity. All of them knew that they were in hell, and they did not want to be enslaved. They told us that many of them were happy to be slaves. That's a lie. That's a whitewash lie. But and also one slave master had a plantation near a river called Niggerhead River, because when he caught his slaves trying to escape, they would be captured. The head would be cut off, stuck on a pole, and placed around the river. He named the river Niggerhead River. So these are the kind of things that happened in slavery that was very brutal. And I mean, all kind of things. They could be whipped at the whipping post with 50 lashes. If they raised a hand to hit one of the slave masters back, or tried to rebel in some sort of manner. Many of them refused to eat. They had their mouths pried open, their teeth broken, and was force fed. Many of them, all type of diabolical punishments that was so evil. It was the norm in our people's lives, as they were property and not, as they was considered property and not human. So can you imagine the physical and the psychological abuse that was so horrendous in their life? And they tell us that the average lifespan of a field slave was 40 years. They worked 16 to 18 hours, 16 hours a day, sun up to sundown. They didn't get very much sleep. The black man, of course, was used as a sexual stud. The black woman, of course, was used as a sexual breeder. She was sold. The children were sold. The families were broke up at will. The women was promised if she had 15 children, the slave master would free her, and then he would lie to her after bearing all those children. There were many slave revolts. Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vest, and Nat Turner was the famous who was a preacher and a prophet. He got so angry he rose up and killed the slave master and his family. He went into the woods for weeks. They could not find him. He was very hungry, and he came back for some food, and a field slave turned Nat Turner in, and they chopped off his head and marched around the city. I'm telling you, meritorious manumission was a slave that they used, was a reward system for other slaves to tell on other slaves. That's why all the revolts fell, because they were constantly telling on each other. So everything that they tried to plan pretty much failed, and it caused a lot of death and a lot of bloodshed. So after this, 100 years, they freed our people from slavery. After 265 years of being ignorant, can't read, can't unlearn, they begin to start a system called sharecropping. What was sharecropping? Another sophisticated form of slavery. Lasted another 100 years with the black codes. And this was very brutal too as well. Many of them still could not read or write. They still was working on the farms and the plantation. Guess who owned the plantations when they was loose from slavery? The white man still owned them. They had to rent all their tools, which the white man charged them exorbitant interest rates for renting the tools. They constantly stayed in debt, never could pay the debt back. They was paid twice a year for sharing their labor for a share of the crop. That's what sharecropping was all about. So they were still dirt poor even 100 years after they was loose from the peculiar institution of slavery. Now, this was diabolically unfair to a people, an entire race of people who had given their hard-earned labor, sweat, blood, and never received reparations. And this is part 1 on slavery. I'll do another part 2, and then we'll do something on the civil rights movement and where we at today. It is Black History Month, February 2012. I'm Brother Ron Washington with Black Media Incorporated saying this. I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.